Will Hunting is a janitor with a mind brilliant enough to solve a mathematical problem that no one else at the university could solve. But as brilliant as Will is, there's one thing he can't seem to figure out: how to let people into his life. He pushes away his therapist, he lies to Skylar about his past, and when she tells him that she loves him, he pushes her away too. Because behind Will's intelligence is something he spent years trying not to face, and that pain is what really controls his life. Will is a kid from a poor neighborhood with a brilliant mind who works as a janitor at a university. One day, Professor Gerald puts an almost impossible challenge on the board for his students: solve a mathematical problem that only a handful of people have ever been able to solve, some of who spent years working on it. While Will is cleaning the hallways, he comes across a problem. He looks at it and takes it home, and he begins working on it in the mirror of his bathroom. The next day, without anyone seeing him, he grabs a piece of chalk and writes the answer on the board. But as brilliant as Will is, he's also deeply troubled. One day, he recognizes someone who used to beat him up in school and decides to attack him. When a police officer tries to stop him, Will attacks him too, and he's arrested. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald asks his students who solved the problem, but no one raises their hand. It's only when he catches Will writing on the board again that he realizes that mysterious mathematical genius is actually the janitor. But the moment Will realizes he's been caught, he runs. Outside the university, Will spends most of his time with his friends. One night at a bar, he meets Skylar. He impresses her with his intelligence, and intrigued by him, she gives him her phone number. Professor Gerald eventually tracks Will down and finds him during his court hearing. Because Will already has a history of theft and violent behavior, the judge sends him to prison. But Gerald manages to get him out under two conditions. Will has to study mathematics with him, and he has to see a therapist. Will goes through multiple therapists, but he refuses to open up. Instead, he mocks them and pushes them away until none of them want to work with them anymore. As a last resort, Gerald asks his old friend Sean, a psychologist, to meet Will. During the first session, Will tries to do exactly what he's done with everyone else. He tries to beg Sean. At first, it doesn't work. But then Will starts talking about Sean's wife, making assumptions that she abandoned him or cheated on him. Sean snaps. He grabs Will and warns him to never disrespect his wife again. Despite the terrible first meeting, Sean doesn't give up on him. The two meet again at a park where Sean reveals that his wife died from cancer. He then tells Will that if he wants to experience something better in his life, eventually he's gonna have to trust someone enough to open up. And I think this scene shows us something important about talking about what we feel. Talking about what hurts us allows us to look at it, understand it, and eventually give a different meaning to what we've lived through. After the session, Will calls Skylar, but he's afraid to actually speak to her, so he hangs up. As Sean and Will continue meeting, they slowly begin to trust each other. Sean asks Will if he has a girlfriend, and Will tells him about Skylar. He admits that he hasn't spoken to her since their first date because he's afraid that if he gets to know her better, he'll discover that she isn't as perfect as he imagined. Sean tells him that neither he nor Skylar is perfect. What matters is whether they're perfect for each other. He tells Will about his late wife, who to him was the most beautiful woman in the world, and yet she would fart in her sleep. The two burst out laughing, and through something so simple they become closer. But what Sean says is true. Nobody's perfect. Searching for someone who is guarantees disappointment. Love isn't about finding someone with no differences or flaws. Maybe it's about finding harmony within those differences. The other person isn't another version of you. Maybe love means finding someone where somehow your incompatibilities become compatible. But to do that, we first have to remove the blindfold of perfection and see the other person for what they really are: an imperfect human being. Encouraged by Sean, Will goes to see Skylar again, and the two have an incredible second date. But when Skylar asks Will about his family, Will becomes uncomfortable. He's afraid to tell her that he's an orphan, so he lies and says he has 12 brothers. During another session, Will asks Sean if he ever regrets meeting his wife. After all, losing her caused him tremendous pain. Sean answers by telling Will how they met. He says he first saw her while he was waiting in line for a baseball game that would later become historic. Will gets excited because he thinks Sean actually witnessed the game and asks him what it was like. But Sean reveals that he never went inside. Instead, he left to spend time with the woman he had just met, the woman who eventually became his wife. Will can't believe Sean gave up the chance to witness a historic game for some girl he just met. But Sean tells him that he's never regretted missing that game, and he has never regretted meeting his wife. Even knowing how much losing her would eventually hurt, he would still choose the years he got to spend with her. The pain of losing someone doesn't erase the happiness of having loved them. Meanwhile, Jared and Sean argue about Will's future. Jared wants Will to use his extraordinary intelligence and become a mathematician. Sean believes Will should be allowed to choose his own path. At the same time, Skylar is moving to California to continue her studies, and she asks Will to come with her. Will refuses. Skylar confronts him about his fear of commitment and the lies he's told her. Eventually, Will breaks. He tells her that he's an orphan, that he's spent his childhood moving from one foster family to another, and that his foster father abused him. Skylar begins crying. She tells Will that she loves him and that she wants to help him, but instead of letting her in, Will pushes her away again. He tells her that he doesn't love her and leaves. Gerald eventually convinces Will to attend an interview for a prestigious mathematics job. Will shows up, but he doesn't even make a real effort to get hired. He doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. Will later says goodbye to Skylar before she leaves for California. She tells him that she loves him. Will smiles, but once again he's too afraid to tell her how he really feels. He's terrified of getting hurt. Eventually, Will and Sean meet for another session. This time Sean has Will's file. Inside are photographs documenting the abuse Will suffered as a child. Sean tells Will that his own father was an alcoholic who abused both him and his mother. Will immediately understands. Sean stands in front of him and says, "It's not your fault." Will tells him that he knows. Sean says it again, "It's not your fault." Will keeps insisting that he knows, but Sean continues again and again and again, until eventually Will can't hide behind those words anymore. He breaks down. He cries. He tries to push Sean away, and Sean reminds him once more that what happened to him as a child wasn't his fault. Finally, Will allows himself to feel everything he spent years trying not to feel. He cries uncontrollably and embraces Sean. And this is where I think we have to stop for a moment. How many people grow up believing that something someone else did was somehow their fault? Their parents separating was their fault? That someone hurting them was their fault? That something that happened to them was somehow something they caused? If you're carrying something like that, remember, you are responsible for your own actions. You are not responsible for the actions other people choose to take against you. Maybe there comes a point when we have to stop carrying a weight that was never ours to carry, because eventually that weight becomes so heavy that it prevents us from moving forward. And that's exactly what Will finally does. He lets go of some of the weight of his past. And for the first time, he's ready to move on. Will tells Sean that he's going to accept one of the jobs Gerald arranged from him, to hug and say goodbye for the final time. Sean reminds Will to follow what he truly wants, and those words stay with them. Because at the end of the movie, Sean finds a letter from Will. Will tells him that he decided not to take the job after all. Instead, he's driving to California to find Skylar. Just as Sean once chose the woman he loved over witnessing a historic baseball game, Will finally makes his own choice. Most of his life, Will allowed fear to decide where he went, but this time, Will decides to follow his heart.